We were discussing chromosome organization, the packaging of chromosomes, the packaging of DNA in eukaryotes, and we discussed up to bead on a string model. So, any doubts on this part? Or should we move on? So, beads
Mama, I
on a
guess we can
string
move on.
model is clear. Vishantan, you were saying something?
Mama said we can move on.
Okay, okay. So in bead on a string model, we discussed that there are four histones, H2A, H2B, H3 and H4, and they are present in two copies of each, and they form this octameric unit forms the core of what is called as, what is the term used?
Nucleosome.
Nucleosome, yes.
Yeah,
And then what is this DNA which connects the two nucleosomes?
that is called linker DNA.
That is called linker DNA. What is the length of linker DNA?
Uh,
What is the length of DNA that wraps around the nucleosome, class?
146.
146 base pairs.
146 base pair. And the length of the, so the total DNA, so from, if we measure from one end, from, for example, from one end of the nucleosome to the other end, so this one linker DNA plus one nucleosome makes up to around 200 base pair. So 146 plus, it's a ballpark idea, so they say 50 to 60 base pair is the length of the linker DNA. Okay, class?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is called as bead on a string model because the beads, the nucleosome, it appears like a bead, and then the linker DNA is like a string. So then the width of this nucleosome is like 11 nanometer. By electron microscopy, it was determined that this looks like an 11 nanometer fiber. Now what happens is that these beads, this bead on a string model is further compacted in the form of a zigzag model or a solenoid model. So you will find in some of the books they describe both solenoid as well as zigzag model, but majorly they describe solenoid model. So in solenoid model, what happens is that so for example, you imagine the solenoid like a uh, so for example, this is one ring, second ring, third ring, fourth ring, fifth ring, and each of these it's like a spiral, and each of these unit of spiral actually contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 copies of nucleosomes which form a ring like structure, and each of these rings, they are interconnected to each other, and then this whole structure looks like a solenoid, and the width of this solenoid is roughly 30 nanometer. So this is called as 30 nanometer fiber. So this is another level of compaction where the histones are, where the nucleosomes actually, there are 6 nucleosomes which form the ring, and then several of these rings which are connected together, they form the solenoid. Okay. So which is shown over here, zigzag model or solenoid model, and the width is roughly 30 nanometers. This is again by electron microscopy. Okay, now this solenoid, this thick fiber which is of 30 nanometers in width, this is further compacted by loops. So there are several loops that this solenoid fiber loops a lot. You will find like bigger loops, smaller loops. So this is another further level of compaction, and this becomes a 300 nanometer fiber, which is actually called as chromatin. So this is kind of the structure which is shown over here, and then this 300 nanometer fiber is further compacted, and it is packed in the form of chromatid. So what you are seeing actually here, so this was one of the question which I will be clarifying in today's class, the difference between chromatin, chromatid and chromosome. So what you are seeing over here at the bottom is the mitotic chromosome, where you are seeing two chromatids which are connected by centromere, and this together the width is 1400 nanometer. That means the width of one single chromatid is 700 nanometer. Are you following or no? So over here,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
we
Yes, ma'am.
start from here, 2 nanometer is the width of the double-stranded DNA, the double helical DNA. 11 nanometer is the width of a bead on a string fiber. 30 nanometer is the zigzag model or the solenoid model. 300 nanometer is the chromatin, which includes heterochromatin and euchromatin, and we will be discussing this in today's class, like what is heterochromatin, what are these bigger loops, and what are these smaller loops, why some loops are bigger and why some loops are smaller and more compacted. 700 nanometer is, so 300 nanometer is chromatin, 700 nanometer is now the width of the chromatid, and two of these chromatids form the chromosome, which is 1400 nanometer in width. So this is how uh, uh, 2-meter long DNA gets packaged in a 4 to 5 micron nucleus, because you have tiers of packaging with the help of nucleosomes, with the help of certain other DNA binding proteins, and these histones also, they are actually there is a lot of post translational modifications. For example, histones can get acetylated, they can get hydroxylated, they can get methylated, they can get phosphorylated, and depending upon these post-translational modifications, these histones can play a role in bringing the DNA together. And these modifications, they also help in further steps of transcription and translation, which you will be learning in the later classes. So up to here, the packaging of DNA is clear, I hope. So this is another diagram which depicts the same. So you have a double helix DNA double helix, and you can see the width is 2 nanometer. Then this is packed in the form of a bead on a string model, where what you are seeing in yellow, the yellow is actually the H1 histone, and then the octamer contains 4 copies of histone, and then you see bead on a string model, and this is the width, which is shown as 11 nanometer. This further packs in the form of zigzag or solenoid model, which is 30 nanometer is now the width. And then this looping, as you can see, this the solenoid fiber, it loops, and this looping causes the width to increase by 300 nanometer, and then further compaction is 700 nanometer, which is in the form of chromatid, and 1400 nanometer in the form of chromosome. So any doubts up till now? Or should we move on, class? You people are there or left already?
No, we are there.
No, ma'am.
Then at least say you are following or no. Okay. So, so as I said, we saw the structure of chromatin, which shows lots of loops. The 30 nanometer fiber, it loops a lot, and then when these loops open up, so this opening of loops is required for expression of genes, and this is facilitated with the help of histone modifying enzymes, which are also called as chromatin remodeling complexes. So histones have to be removed for expression of genes, and these genes, as we discussed in, I guess, the first class or maybe the second class, that I think in the first class, that in eukaryotic chromosome you have only 1 to, let's say, 15% genes are there. I mean the gene rich region, and rest of the DNA is repetitive DNA. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So then, so then when we talk about high level expression of the genes, so that means this region has to be rich in genes, right? That is why genes are getting expressed.
Yes, ma'am.
Class? Okay. So depending upon this, depending upon the organization, the distribution of genes, and depending upon the staining pattern also, this chromatin can be classified into two types: heterochromatin and euchromatin. So heterochromatin, class, are you aware of, have you studied this? What is heterochromatin? What is euchromatin?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay, so then don't worry. So heterochromatin is actually kind of inactive region. Inactive region of a chromosome, and what I mean by inactive region of chromosome is that it is gene poor. That means it does not contain genes. Does not contain genes, and let's say it actually contains a lot of repetitive sequences. Okay, and it is highly compacted, highly compacted. Sequence wise, this is 80 rich, so it is rich in 80 sequences. And the other point is that when we stain, this actually stains dark with a dye called, and I will be explaining you in a second like what is giemsa and how and why this stains dark. Euchromatin on the other hand is actually gene rich. So because it is gene rich, we call it as the active part of the chromosome, right? And instead of being 80 rich, this is usually GC rich. This is less compacted. So when I say less compacted, that means it also surrounds the nucleosomes, but still it is less compacted, and it slightly with IMSA. So this is the major difference between heterochromatin and euchromatin. So heterochromatin, when we talk about it, is, as I said, it contains a lot of repetitive sequences, and euchromatin is gene rich. So that means when we talk about these loops, so this what you are seeing as the opened up loop is actually what is called as what? Heterochromatin or euchromatin?
Euchromatin.
Okay, what about others? Are you people following or no?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
Heterochromatin can be further classified into facultative and constitutive. Okay, so as the name itself says, constitutive heterochromatin means which. So constitutive and facultative, we are going to use these terms a lot in the rest of the classes as well. So constitutive means which remains in that state all the time. So for example, constitutive promoter or constitutive, in this case it is constitutive heterochromatin. That means it remains in a heterochromatic stage all the time. That means it remains inactive all the time. So for example, the examples of constitutive heterochromatin are regions which are located at the telomere. So telomere, if you remember from the last class, they are present at the ends of the chromosomes, and they are required for maintaining the stability at the ends, at the terminal regions of the chromosome, right? So constitutive heterochromatins are localized at telomeric region or centromere. And centromere, I hope the class remembers, it's the region by which the two chromatids are connected to each other. You remember that? And then they are connected with the spindle fibers.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. So, and facultative heterochromatin is that part of heterochromatin which, depending upon the stage of the cell cycle or depending upon the requirement, it can be turned on. So it can be converted into euchromatin. So there are few regions in the eukaryotic chromosome which actually contain facultative heterochromatin, which can be converted into, which can be turned on depending on specific. we talk about euchromatin, so in euchromatin also you have the term which is called as constitutive euchromatin, and constitutive euchromatin means which always and always remains on, and this actually contains genes which are responsible for housekeeping functions. Housekeeping functions means which are required for the survivability of the cell. So those genes are called as housekeeping genes because they perform housekeeping function. That means they encode for proteins which are required for the survivability of the cell. So they need to be on all the time. They need to be constitutively expressed all the time, because even if you have reduced expression or no expression, then you can have drastic consequences. So this was about the chromatin part. Then we also discussed that heterochromatin is the inactive region of the chromosome because it does not contain genes. It contains repetitive sequences, but then we also discussed that it stains dark with a dye called GIMSA. So here comes the what is called as banding pattern or banding of chromosomes. So G banding, as the term itself says, this is because we use a dye called GIMSA. So GIMSA, so this G is for GIMSA dye, and this GIMSA dye is used for staining the chromosomes. So now the question is how, for example, we can stain the chromosome first thing, and whether chromosomes have any color to start with, because we discussed in the class that the word chromosome means chrome means color and some means body. So that means chromosome is a colored body. So but then when we isolate the chromosomes from a cell, then these chromosomes, they are usually colorless. So we use several dyes which can be either visible dyes or fluorescent dyes, and these dyes can selectively stain certain regions depending upon the requirement, and then they can create a pattern. So the first example of this is GIMSA dye, and the banding pattern is called G banding. So when we stain with GIMSA, the heterochromatin region will appear dark and the euchromatin region will appear light. So therefore, a banding pattern is created of light and dark shades, and it would look something like this. It would look something like this. So you see, you have regions which are dark, you have regions which are light. So what are the dark regions I told you just now?
Heterochromatin.
Heterochromatin, very good. And what are the light regions? Huh?
Ma'am, the ET rich are the dark region and the G rich are the light region.
Right. Right. So you have dark regions are heterochromatin when we are using it. When we are using GIMSA dye and we are doing G banding. Okay, so before I explain you the other banding patterns, let us look at this particular figure carefully. So in this figure, what we are seeing is that this is called as karyotype. So karyotype means the total chromosomes of an organism when they are arranged in the order of their decreasing sizes. So for example, this is the largest and then you have the smallest. So the chromosomes are arranged in the depending upon the sizes, and this arrangement of chromosomes is called as a karyotype. So when we talk about a karyotype of an organism, it should actually display all possible chromosomes of that organism, right? But then we cannot see a chromosome under a microscope unless and until we apply a stain, right? Because chromosomes are colorless. So therefore when we stain with a dye, for example GIMSA, then you will see pattern. So, and then you can discriminate all of these chromosomes based upon the sizes. Is it clear, class?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what happens is that the image that you are seeing on the left side, so what you are seeing in the right side is the arrangement of the chromosome, which is called as karyotype, and what you are seeing on the left side is actually called as a chromosome spread, which is actually also called as metaphase spread. So what happens is that when we isolate the chromosomes, so usually for isolation of chromosomes class, particularly when we talk about humans, so for isolation of chromosomes usually blood cells are used most of the time. When we talk about blood cells, as we discussed in the class, red blood cells do not contain nucleus. So what we use is actually in the blood cells, we separate WBCs, RBCs, plasma, serum, everything, and then we collect separately white blood cells. Okay, so white blood cells are the ones which are rapidly dividing. So you try to separate white blood cells. Now depending upon the amount of cells, so for example if you have a large amount of blood, then in fact you can proceed directly, but if you have a small amount of blood sample, then what we can do is we can separate white blood cells in a medium. Okay, and these white blood cells, they can be cultured in a medium, in a growth medium. And you can allow, for example, these white blood cells to grow for like 2 or 3 days. So they will keep growing and then they will keep dividing. This is only to increase the number of white blood cells. And then what you do is that you can actually use a hypotonic medium, which actually will cause the white blood cells to burst open, and then this will release the chromosomes from the white blood cells. Now the point is, like one of the question was at which particular stage the cells would be in the cell cycle, because if you remember we discussed in the class that you can have stages, different stages. For example, interphase, when the DNA is getting synthesized, right? You have prophase, you have metaphase, you have anaphase, and you have telophase. So then the question is at which particular stage one should collect the cells so that you can actually observe the karyotype. So if we select at interphase, the DNA will be in the form of chromatin. It will be all loosely present, right? So therefore the stage that is selected is class metaphase. So but then the question is how we halt the cells, stop the cells at a metaphase stage of cell cycle. So for this purpose, drug is used which is called as this particular drug colchicine. What it can do is that colchicine drug, it actually inhibits spindle formation, and spindle formation is required for anaphase, if you remember, because these spindles, they depolymerize and then they pull away the chromatids apart. You remember from the cell cycle figure?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
So what happens is that when we add this colchicine drug, then this inhibits spindle formation, and therefore the cell cycle actually rests. Phase stage, right? So it is at this stage when we obtain the cells which are in the form of chromosomes, and then when we stain with a dye called Giemsa. So Giemsa is actually a combination of two dyes class. It's a combination of two reagents. One is called as eosine and the other is called as my cursor disappeared. And no, three no, Thaya. We use this dye Giemsa, and then we can actually observe the pattern of the chromosomes. Now the question is, we discussed in the class that in metaphase, we actually see two chromatids which are linked by a centromere. So where are the two chromatids? We are seeing like single chromosomes. So this was one of the question which was raised by one of the students of your class. So therefore, what happens is that when we prepare when we isolate the cells in such a way, for example, white blood cells are separated, then you allow the white blood cells to grow, correct? And then you isolate the chromosomes by using a hypotonic solution. And then when we do all of this exercise and then when we stain, they would appear exactly like this. So you will not see the two chromatids separated apart. But when we use the same spread under a very high resolution, high magnification microscope, then in fact you will be able to see the two chromatids which are linked by a centromere. So when we say the difference between a chromosome and chromatid and chromatin, so I hope chromatin is clear to the class that chromatin is actually the 300 nanometer fiber which contains looped solenoid fibers which are looped in the form of heterochromatin and euchromatin class. So that is actually chromatin. When we talk about chromatid, so chromatid is actually the chromosome actually has two chromatids. One is the original one and the other one which is newly replicated one. And the two chromatids are linked together by a centromere, and this whole structure is called as a chromosome. I hope this is clear to everyone.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. It is clear now.
Agrim, you want to say something?
No, ma'am, I said yes. I can
Okay.
understand.
Okay. Ratnesh, followed or no?
Yes, ma'am. Now it is clear.
Okay. Okay. And G banding is clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So then let's talk about the other banding techniques. So R banding. So R is actually, the term R is for reverse. So R banding is actually the reverse of G banding. So in this case, what is done is that the term R depicts reverse banding, and this is again used for observing the chromosomes only. But in this case, as the term itself says, reverse banding, so the banding pattern is exactly opposite to what you observe in case of G banding. Okay, so for example, the regions which are stained dark in case of G banding. So which regions are stained dark in G banding class? We discussed just
Heterochromatin region.
huh?
Heterochromatin.
Heterochromatin. Jaskin Singh, which region is stained light in G banding?
Euchromatin.
Euchromatin, very good. So when we talk about reverse, so in reverse, what will happen? Euchromatin will get which stain?
Dark one.
Arc, correct. So this is exactly opposite of what you observe in G banding. So this is R banding. In this case, the euchromatin will actually become dark and heterochromatin will become light. So this is used only and only under special cases where you actually want to cross confirm the banding pattern. And in this case, what we do is that we use the same dye, which is Ginsa, but then before performing the staining, we actually incubate these chromosomes in a hot phosphate buffer bath. What you do is that you incubate these chromosomes in the presence of hot phosphate buffer. So these get heated up, and then when we apply the stain Ginsa, then the banding pattern becomes reverse. So this has been experimentally demonstrated that you can actually observe the reverse of what you see in case of G banding. C banding is, as the term itself says, C is for centromere and T is for C and T banding also are used, for example, in cases where you want to observe selectively centromere or when you want to observe selectively telomere. So the question is, when do we want exactly C banding? So C banding is used to determine, for example, whether a chromosome contains one centromere or two centromeres, whether it's monocentric or dicentric, right? T banding C banding is also used to determine the location of centromere, for example, whether it is metacentric or submetacentric or acrocentric, etc. Right? T banding is used when you want to selectively observe the telomeres. So when people age, then the length of the telomere decreases. So you can actually compare the length of the telomere from a newborn child to versus a 30-35-year-old individual versus a 60 to 70-year-old individual, and you will see the differences in the width of the telomere. So in those cases, again, uh, you can use T banding. So for both G, R, C and T banding, we use the same dye called GIMSA, but then we play with the conditions. So for example, when we say G banding, we are directly using GIMSA. When we use R banding, we are actually heating it up. When we use, for example, C or T banding, then again we play with some buffers. We for example treat it with alkaline solution, saturated alkaline solution in case of C banding. So the DNA is denatured and then it is treated with alkaline solution. So likewise, but again the treatment is with GIMSA only. Uh, but the purpose is completely different. In case of G and R banding, you are going to see the entire staining pattern spread over the entire chromosome, whereas in C banding, you are only looking at centromere. T banding, you are only looking at telomere. Q banding is a fluorescent called fluorescent dye. So instead of GIMSA, you can also use quinacride dye, which can give you a pattern called with the help of and you can observe it under a fluorescence microscope. So this creates a pattern which is similar to G banding. The only difference is that it will be fluorescent. It will be observed under a fluorescence microscope. So hope it is clear to everyone. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
One more technique which is used for observing the chromosomes, particularly eukaryotic chromosomes, is called as fluorescence in. The detailed principles you will understand when I will be teaching you DNA hybridization and southern blotting, etc. But in principle, uh, the technique of fluorescence in situ hybridization utilizes a probe, right? A probe, and this probe is actually a small oligonucleotide. You know what is an oligonucleotide? Yes or no?
A nucleotide which has, I think, 3 to 10 amino acid residues.
Right. So it's a small oligonucleotide. It's a single-stranded DNA in the range of roughly 10 to 15 nucleotides, and it is labeled with a fluorescent tag. Okay, so what happens is that with the double-stranded DNA, when we denature the double-stranded DNA, right? So what will happen is that after denaturation, so let's say you have a you denature this double-stranded DNA, allow the probe to hybridize. Now what will happen is that because the probe is small in size, so depending upon the complementarity, Class, I hope you know what is complementary DNA. I mean, are you familiar with these words?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Yes. So for example, if the sequence is ATGC, AGCT, so then you know what is the complementary sequence?
Yes, ma'am. It will be like TACG and TCGA.
Fine.
Like
Yes. What you do is that you design this probe, and this probe is going to bind to a region wherever it will find its complementary sequence, and therefore the region, because it has hybridized, it has now, because of the complementarity between the sequences, it will pair up, and therefore wherever it has wherever the binding has taken place, that region will appear, that region will glow because it has a fluorescent tag attached to it.
Ma'am, so this is the principle used in PCR, right?
This is the principle used in PCR, yes, but in this case, in PCR we use a thermal cycler and we perform number of cycles. But here, what we are doing is that we are not. There is no amplification. The primer, there is no amplification. No two primers are required. A small oligonucleotide which is tagged with a fluorescent tag is used, and it is allowed to bind to the DNA, and because of this complementarity, wherever it binds, that region will glow under a fluorescence microscope. So that is why the technique is called as fluorescence in situ hybridization. Fluorescence because it has a fluorescence tag, hybridization because the probe is actually hybridizing with the double-stranded DNA after denaturation, and in situ because it can be performed in real cells. You don't have to isolate the chromosome for this purpose. You can perform this while the chromosome is present inside the cell. All you do is that you permeabilize the cells with the help of, for example, chloroform or SDS, just enough so the pores are created which are of enough size that these oligonucleotides can permeate in, and then you can observe it under in situ conditions. So there is a difference in situ, in vivo and in vitro. In vitro means when you are performing on the isolated chromosome, on the isolated DNA class. In vivo means when you are performing in the live cells, the cell is not dead. In situ means it's in between of in vivo and in vitro. You are actually permeabilizing the cells, you are creating transient pores so that the DNA, the probe can enter, and then you can have hybridization. Followed? In principle, is it clear? We will discuss in details the principles of hybridization in the later classes when I will be teaching you DNA hybridization, because it will require temperature or it will require formamide, so different reagents are required. But in principle, the idea of fish is clear or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so then where were we? So we discussed the different banding patterns which can be used for observing the DNA, or you can use fish to observe specific regions of the DNA. And this fish probes can be designed to specific regions. For example, if you want to observe only repetitive sequences, then you can design a probe which is specific to a repeat. So for example, if this sequence ATGC, AGCT, if this is the region which is continuously repeating, then in that case what you can do is you can design a probe which is specific to this. So wherever this repeat is there, you will see that. So then you can utilize this technique to observe, let's say, repetitive sequences or certain unique sequences. Okay.
Ma'am, what does that triple N mean?
Triple N means any. So this whole cassette is getting repeated, right? So triple N means you can have a gap of, let's say, AGC. N means any, A, T, G or C.
Yeah, okay.
But then again you have a repeat, and again you have a gap of 3 or 4 nucleotides, and again that repeat is there. So when we talk about repeats, you can have repeats in the form of breaks. For example, in this case, you have a break of gap of 3 nucleotide or 4 nucleotide, or you can have no gap. So in this case, these repeats are called as direct repeats or tandem repeats. But we will be discussing that in the later classes. The various types of repeats. Should we move on, class? So hope karyotype is also clear to everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So this is a typical karyotype where the chromosomes are arranged based on the sizes, and what you can see is that when we prepare a metaphase spread, which is shown on the left, then how do we know that which chromosome is, let's say, chromosome number 21, which chromosome is chromosome number 1, which chromosome is chromosome number 19? Tell me.
We will arrange by size and then we will decide.
Okay, and so one point is, yes, you will know the size and you can arrange them by size. And we discussed in today's class, students don't sleep
On the basis of the banding pattern, maybe.
on the basis of the banding pattern. Very good. So we discussed that each chromosome is going to have a unique banding pattern. What about what's the third possibility? Agrip, Dhwani, Yukti. Are you people there or left? Dave, Priya? What about what other method? Which other method do you think can be used to discriminate? Maybe something from this figure if you can. So length is one.
Centromere.
Centromere, yes. So depending upon the position of centromere also. So for example, chromosome 1 is which type of chromosome?
Metacentric.
Metacentric. Excellent. Then chromosome 12 is?
Submetacentric.
Submetacentric. Very good. So you are going to see three features. One is length or size. Number 2, banding pattern with the help of G banding or R banding. Number 3, what? The position of the centromere. Right?
Right now.
Based upon these three features, we can actually discriminate the various types of chromosomes. And then this technique, once you have learned karyotype, once you have learned how to identify the chromosomes, then this technique can be used to study what is called as chromosomal aberrations. Chromosomal aberrations, as the term itself says, aberrations means any deviation from the normal. Right? So when we talk about chromosomal aberrations, they can be of two types: numerical aberrations and structural aberrations. Numerical aberrations are the aberrations where we see a difference in the total number of the chromosome, and that is why the term is called as numerical aberration. Numerical, that means there is a difference in the number. Structural aberration means when there is a difference in the structure. So numerical aberration means, for example, when we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, or we say 46 chromosomes. So in this case, any deviation, for example, if you have 47, this is a numerical aberration. You have 45, this is a numerical aberration. You have 48, again a numerical aberration, right? You have an increase or decrease in the number of the chromosome. Right? Structural aberration, when we talk about differences in the structure, for example, a deletion of a region, right, or a duplication of a region. So deletion is going to result in a decrease in length. So there will be a change in the structure of the chromosome, correct? It will become slightly smaller in size if a large segment is deleted, right? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
And if a large segment is duplicated,
Ma'am, can you please explain structural aberration once again?
Structural aberration matlab changes in the structure of the chromosome, right? Structure. So for example, this what you are seeing in the figure is the structure, right? So for example, deletion in, for example, let's say a small segment is deleted. So in this case, this particular chromosome will become smaller. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. When we talk about duplication, for example, a large sequence is now duplicated. It is present in now 2 copies. So in this case, the length will increase or decrease? Array? Increase, yes. So therefore, if the length will increase, so the structure will change in the sense that it will become slightly longer. So any changes in the structure are grouped under structural aberrations, and any change in the number are grouped under numerical aberrations. Followed?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Okay, so maybe it's 9:50. I will quickly explain you the numerical aberrations, few examples, and then maybe we will discuss. Huh? Say it again.
I have a doubt?
Yes, tell me, Dhwani.
Actually, when we were talking about identifying chromosomes, you said that we could identify them by banding patterns also. So,
Yes.
do we have a fair idea of what kind of banding patterns should be visible in chromosome 1 and chromosome 2? That sort of
Yes.
a thing.
Right, right. So
So, is
remember in
that unique to different species?
say it again.
So, is that like for humans, we will see so and so binding patterns, for
Yes,
some other
yes,
species? So,
yes.
we have
It's
a.
very right
Okay.
because you remember that. So the definition that is said is that the repetitive sequences they vary a lot. So when we will be discussing DNA fingerprinting, you will learn more that how only identical twins are similar, the banding pattern and rest of them. Even though the phenotype is same, the genotype, I mean the repetitive sequences are very, very different. So therefore, and it is these repeats which are going to give rise to these banding patterns, right? The heterochromatin regions. So species wise, for example, Homo sapiens, humans, they are going to have a different, a very unique banding pattern. And when we compare it with chimpanzees, it's going to be a different banding pattern.
Okay. And when we initially identify a species, how
Yes.
would in that case we number the chromosomes? Just by the
Right.
length?
No, so in that case, so when you have identified a new species, I mean a completely new strain, so these days what, so there are a couple of possibilities when it's a new species or a new uh, isolate, then what we do is that you do all kinds of staining, but then you try to compare it with the closest relative, right? And then you see that, okay, see the differences are not going to be 100% different, right? So for example, if we talk about this, then it's not going to be completely different, but then you will see that, okay, 90% patterns or 80% banding pattern is similar, but then there are these bands which are unique, something like this. So they are depicted, so the way they write it is write it like this is, for example, let's say if it is chromosome number 5, so they write it as 5p and then maybe 1, something like this. So 5p1 ka matlab chromosome number 5, p is the upper arm, petite arm, p the upper arm, and 1 is the first band, something like this. So this is how they depict the differences. You're
Okay.
getting the point, Dhwani. So you can actually label the chromosomes and say that, okay, out of the 23 chromosomes, 23 pairs of chromosomes, the differences are with respect to chromosome number 7, 10, 11, 19, something like this. And then you can actually label them that whether it is in the P arm or in the Q arm. And then you can mention, for example, whether it's the first band or band number 17, something like this.
Right, right. Okay, got it.
Okay. So, should I explain you, or in the next class you want me to to do a quick revision, or should I explain you these aberrations?
Ma'am, one more question. Ma'am,
Yes.
what is the significance of numbering? As in, why do we practice it?
Why do we?
Why do we number the chromosomes? What is the
Yes.
significance of numbering them?
Right. The significance of the numbering is that, Ashi, that if we do not number them, then how do we identify that whether the changes were taken place in which numbered chromosome? So, for example, trisomy 21 is Down syndrome. So, if we do not number them, how do we know that it's the 21st chromosome? Something like this. So numbering is a way of representing, right? So that's what I was telling you. Like you will write 21P or 21Q and then which banding pattern. It's a way of identifying. It's a way of depicting the changes.
Right, ma'am.
Okay. So class, do you want me to do a quick revision before we, or should we discuss 5 more minutes?
I guess we can
Ma'am,
discuss
one
further.
last question.
Huh?
Ma'am, so like, why do we even need, why do we need these different ways of identifying chromosomes when length can be sufficient in itself? Because I'm sure the length would be varying
Right.
in most
So
chromosomes.
yes, Dhwani. So what you see is that in the karyotype, for example, if you look at the length of 1 and 2, the difference is not much. But then the difference is with respect to the position of centromere. Likewise, if you look at the chromosomes, for example, 14 and 15, then they are quite similar in length. Right, many of them are similar in length, but then you need to check for all three, the positioning of the centromere and the banding patterns.
Okay, fair.
Right, so for example here if you see they have opened up the structure, so you see that chromosomes numbers, these they are very similar in length, but then if you look at the banding pattern, it's very different. So you need to have all three taken into account to come up with a conclusion.
Okay.
And so this karyotyping is done for multiple reasons. You can actually use karyotyping for identifying a disease. So even before a child is born, so for example, if the doctor suspect that the child is going to have, for example, Mongolism, so in this cases you can actually identify by looking at the fetal cells, and then you can actually identify the genotype, and you can say that okay, this is going to be a Klinefelter syndrome, or this is going to be this child is going to have a problem, and this child is not going to survive because of this disease or mental retardation. So several syndromes are there. For example, trisomy 21 is Down syndrome, trisomy 13 is Edwards syndrome, trisomy 18 is another syndrome. So there are different diseases which can result. Klinefelter syndrome, where you have triple X or double XY. So these are males which are born with two copies of X chromosome and one of Y. So all kinds of problems can happen. So we can discuss these more in detail in tomorrow's class.
Ma'am, in this karyotype slide,
टाइप स्लाइड कहाँ गई? हाँ.
yeah, in this slide, the XY chromosome is different in the with respect to the above slide. So why, ma'am, why is it so? Like in this, just a single, we can see like a single line is there, and in this we can see there is a difference.
Oh, so is this the question that why we are seeing chromatids here and chromosome, I mean single chromosome here?
Yes,
And
yes, ma'am.
right, so I explained you in today's class also that when we prepare a metaphasic spread, right, from white blood cells by treating it with a hypotonic solution, and when we simply stain it and observe it under a microscope, you are going to observe like this. But this kind of picture will be observed under a very high magnification, high resolution microscope. So these are there in the above picture as well, but it is just that it would look very bulky and it's not well separated. So you can observe this kind of picture under a very, very high resolution microscope. Very high magnification, high resolution. Also on a particular stage of cell cycle. So as I said, if you treat it with colchicine, then actually the cell cycle will arrest at metaphase and you can observe it.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Now I understood the TRL about this.
Okay, good. What about others? Class following or no? Deepak, following?
Yes, ma'am.
Rishita, Ritika, are you people there or left? Maybe left already. Paras Chaudhary,
Yes, ma'am.
followed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. Agrim Ayush,
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Follow.
ma'am.
okay, very good. So we will discuss chromosomal aberrations in detail in tomorrow's class.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'll close the meeting now.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.